Angela Sorotos, welcome to interview with Adrian, Aston Legal Group. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And so can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Angela? You're the owner of Inner North Psychology Centre. Did I get that right?
You did get
Good.
that right. Yes,
Good.
inner North psychology. I am clinically and forensically trained.
Yep.
And so that means that I'm a clinical psychologist and have extensive training in forensic psychology. And I do a few different things. So I'm also a behaviour support practitioner, but that work, I suppose, is a little bit different to the family law type work.
Yep.
That kind of assisting individuals with disability and complex dual diagnosis presentations. So yeah, I do a few different things in the
So
space.
is that with sort of like disabled people, mentally impaired, or like acquired brain injuries or stuff like that, or?
Yeah, it could be intellectual disabilities, or it could be developmental disabilities, so sort of the whole range, and then that also are presenting with mental illness comorbidly. So often working with these individuals who might be engaging in challenging behaviours that, or behaviours of concern that essentially can be quite violent at times. As a result of their disability, and just working together with them to try and reduce those behaviours in the least restrictive way possible.
Sounds tough. So
yeah, look, it is a difficult space, but one that is incredibly important and rewarding, and I'd say that I enjoy that just as much as the clinical and forensic work. So
yeah,
never a boring day. Adrian.
Oh, and how long have you been owning and operating Inner North Psychology for,
Look,
Angela?
I've had Inner North running for about 3 years now, so it's still relatively new, I suppose. But I've been in the space in the criminal justice system for over 15 years now.
Wow, giving your age away there.
I am.
You're meant to play it down as you get older. Oh, I've been at this for a few years.
Yeah, just graduated.
Just graduated. Yeah, just come out of uni.
You could do the math, but
yeah.
I've spent a lot of time working in government organisations, and more recently, just starting to kind of split my time between government and non-for-profit and the private sector. So,
and before we get on to what you do and who you are and family law and all that, can you tell the people who are watching, because they're most interested in what you're drinking, can you tell us what you're drinking?
So I'm drinking a Hughes & Hughes, here we go, Pinot Noir from Tasmania.
Lovely. You poured yourself a glass already.
I have poured myself a glass
Good.
already.
Going down well?
It's going down very well. And I'm the theme of these sessions, Adrian.
Oh, great. This will help us along the way,
Sure,
chin chin.
Cheers.
Well, cheers. I'm drinking a TWR organic wine from Marlborough, and it's a mixture of it's a Riesling, Pinot Gris, and another name I can't pronounce anyway. That looks really bad, but it's a lovely drop, and it's like a German Gewürztraminer. Anyway, someone's going to correct me later on, and they'll say, "Learn what you're drinking." But I'm onto this organic wine at the moment because I feel like if I have a few glasses, I don't get this hangover afterwards.
Yeah.
Have you drank organic wine or?
Look, if I have, it hasn't been a conscious choice.
Okay.
So I can't say I specifically procure it, but if you're telling me that it mitigates the hangover, then
you got to try it. It's no preservatives, and it's just you have a few glasses, you wake up next day, and it's not like the normal kick that you get sometimes with a punchy, Shiraz or Pinot or.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So. As you know, I'm one of the founding partners at Aston Legal Group, and we specialise in family law. We do a lot of divorce type matters, settlements, children matters, and you have given some amazing lectures and Zoom webinars for myself and my staff. Can you tell us what in family law do you find the most common sort of allegations, I suppose, when you're dealing with couples that are separating, you've got to do one of these reports for them?
Yeah, look, I think, increasingly so, we're seeing a real flavour of family violence emerging in society. And I mean, it's not new, but certainly research recently as well has shown that even as a result of COVID-19, the incidence of family violence has really skyrocketed. And so a lot of the allegations definitely have a flavour of family violence, sometimes sexual abuse allegations of one of the parents towards the children, and often it's quite an acrimonious family breakdown,
Yeah.
and so it presents very challenging circumstances.
And with family law, what does that the family law violence allegations, what does that sort of entail? Is that mainly, is that a particular area of family violence that you would say is more prevalent post-COVID, or?
Look, I think, fairly consistently, whether they're allegations of physical violence, coercive control and intimidation
Yeah.
has been quite prevalent as well. And we're just seeing this kind of escalating pattern of behaviour that, starts off as, I guess, maybe a strained kind of relationship. Often the clients that I work with describe the onset as our relationship was becoming toxic, and I always like to try and understand what that means, because it's such a sort of broad term, isn't it?
Yeah.
But usually individuals are referring to just this kind of breakdown, and one party's feeling coerced or intimidated or threatened by the other, and controlled, and often the other party doesn't acknowledge that and doesn't have insight into that. And it creates a real tension, in particular in the family law space. And this has been, an issue that's, I guess, been kind of escalating over time, in particular how the Family Law Act navigates family violence, and even the intersection of that with, parental alienation type cases. There's some real challenges there that I think the system still needs to resolve.
Yeah. So just for the people at home, parental alienation is where one parent alienates the other, or alienates the children, I suppose, from the other. Do you find that that's a common sort of allegation or position in family law, that you get a family that come to you and there's allegations of parental alienation? And if so, why? Or
yeah, look, I mean, I would say that it is a fairly common theme in terms of the work I do anyway. I'm not sure, if other professionals would have a similar lens. Sometimes it depends on, the nature of the work that you end up gravitating towards, but certainly it's something I see quite a lot. And true alienation cases are actually not that common, but it is an allegation that comes up a fair bit. And the work of a family report writer, for example, is to really try and differentiate if actual alienating behaviours are occurring, or whether estrangement type behaviours are occurring. And I suppose for the people listening, the key delineation between those two is, in estrangement cases, the children might develop a resistance towards one parent for legitimate means. So if there were genuine allegations of family violence substantiated, for example, and the children are traumatised and fearful of the other parent, then that would fall under the estrangement kind of banner, if you like. Yep. Or if a parent has serious mental illness that's unaddressed and their behaviour is distressing for the child, and the child moves away from that parent, that's estrangement. But where alienation behaviours are present are essentially where one of the parents is denigrating the other parent to the child, making the child fearful of the other parent without any real kind of evidence or legitimate reason to do so.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I suppose, what's separation anxiety, for example. Sometimes clients don't necessarily say it to the kids, but they're anxious and they may be bad-mouthing or denigrating the other party, and the kids can hear that, the children can hear that, and then they somehow think, oh, I don't want to see mum or dad anymore. And that's a real issue. And then I suppose what we refer them on to therapeutic counselling. But I can say from a lot of our clients, that is an issue. separating one's emotion from the separation, and not trying to show that around the kids or say anything, you know, bad about mum or dad around the kids. It's very hard, I suppose.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, particularly in the context of relationship breakdowns that haven't been amicable, it does ask a lot of both parties. But ultimately, you know, what we really know from the research is that the one factor that causes the longest term health implications and harm for the children is where there is that, you know, I guess toxic, if we use that phrase again, relationship between mum and dad, and those tensions that are present and continue to play out in front of the children.
What sort of tips can you give people that have separated that find themselves in a toxic sort of separation, and they don't want it to be toxic and they want to sort of cool things down, and they can't help that because the other side are really pressing and being toxic without them preempting it? What sort of tips can you give those people?
It's so difficult, isn't it, Adrian? But I think one of the key tips is really just some distance. If you can't be in the same place at the same time and be amicable, then find a kind of third party that can help mediate and facilitate the changeovers.
Yeah.
Using applications online, like I think, you know, our Family Wizard, and there's a few of those around where you can communicate via these forums, and you are able to really sort of minimize that kind of crossover.
Yeah.
Where you're putting yourself in the highest risk situation for some kind of tension to flare up in front of the children, and then risk exposing the kids to that.
Yeah, I've often said to some of my clients as well, you know, degress through the stages in terms of communication tools. So, for example, if it's on the phone and and the other side's screaming at you, or the ex-partner screaming at you, then go to text messages. If they're beeping too much on your text on your phone, then go to WhatsApp, or then go to emails. Like, you know, I often say that just so it's not accessible, and then people need to think before they attack, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they're great tips, and they're all tips that really sort of feed into this idea of creating a bit of space and a bit of distance. And what we're trying to do through all of these kind of behavior modifications is create space to not make room for that initial reactivity, which is where you say and do things that, you know, you might later regret.
Yes, and then, you know, you end up having more implications with other proceedings, you know, intervention order type things, which are red hot, I suppose, at the moment. We've found that our intervention order proceedings are just red hot. I don't know if you found that with your caseload, look,
I suppose, you know, I also have a role at the Children's Court, and almost every case that I work on there's intervention orders that are active, and yeah.
What's your role there, Angela? What's your role?
I'm a family evaluator at the Children's Court clinic as well. So very similar kind of work, I guess, across the Children's Court and the Family Court, and they often get confused, but they are different jurisdictions. And the main difference between the two kind of courts is the populations that we work with. In the Children's Court, it's split into two divisions. There's the Family Division and the Criminal Division. The Criminal Division is essentially there to help process and assess children who have offended. And the Family Division is really to address protective orders and protective concerns where, you know, one or both of the parents have been found to not have the capacity to parent, or to be maltreating or harming the children, and ultimately the state or Department of Health and Human Services intervenes. So, you know, child protection is a heavy kind of flavour in that space, whereas in the family courts, we're looking more at the dissolution of marriage and relationships and how that then impacts the children. So,
but I suppose it's all dealing with kids and issues around separation, care arrangements with kids, very interesting. So tell me, in the family law space, we find that often a question is people asking, what age can we start to listen to kids, their views? You know, I've got clients that have kids that are 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're saying, look, these kids are telling me we want half the time with mum and dad. One of the common questions I suppose you get asked is, you know, what age would you recommend to these people, to these clients and these lay people, to really factor in what the children want and what their wishes are?
Yeah, look, this is a question that comes up quite a bit, and it's a difficult one because there is no sort of magic number ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're sort of really trying to assess the maturity of the child and how much they understand the gravity of the situation.
Yep.
Certainly, as a assessor, I will interview and play with and speak to children to try and understand what their views are from, you know, as young as they're able to talk and communicate that. And sometimes that's communicated verbally, other times that's communicated through play or through drawings. So I think it's always important to give them a space to be heard,
Yep.
but certainly the younger they are, you know, the less weight that is going to be put on that ultimately. Yep. Because, you know, developmentally, they're just not at an age where they're able to do so. And I think, I mean, I'd be interested to hear from you what your experience is, but certainly in the cases I worked on, anywhere from maybe sort of 12 onwards, and I'm not saying that 12 is that magic number, but
yeah.
Be that kind of pre-pubescent / pubescent transition where there are some children who are mature enough to really articulate why they have the position they have, and obviously as they move further into their teenage years, judges will place more weight on.
Yeah, good luck telling a 13 or 14-year-old where they're going to go and who they're going to live with. Good luck.
Yeah, it has its challenges, doesn't it?
It does, you know. Yeah, I look. I get asked it a lot. The magic number years ago was sort of 10 in my experience. For some reason, that's what a lot of the psychologists, clinical psychologists, were telling us lawyers and us barristers and solicitors. But there were different studies around this. There was, and you're going to correct me here because I know that I'm going to get this wrong, but there was like a Hawkins study and a McIntosh social study. So there were these two social studies and they were thrown around the courts. This is 10, 15, 20 years ago. I'm giving my age away a little bit, but, you know, 15 years ago, there was this study that said, oh, kids under 5 should not go overnight with the non-primary carer. So a lot of the time when you're representing dad, 10 years, 15 years ago, the court was saying, oh, when the child's under 5, they should not go overnight with dad. And, you know, it was around the late 2000s, so 07, 08, 09, where that changed. And that, for some reason, this swept through the psychology world, and then it swept through the legal world. And then all of a sudden they said, oh, it's okay, but shorter periods, and then majority periods with the primary sort of carer. And I found that really interesting in my experience, that it just changed literally within probably a few months.
You know, look, I suppose research is a really kind of evolving body, isn't it? It's not static, it's dynamic. As we learn more and we research more, we do make those changes to reflect what's coming out of the research. But, you know, ultimately it's driven from an attachment lens. And what's really important in those very early kind of years around infancy and that kind of toddler phase is trying to preserve the attachment that that child has made with their primary caregiver. Because ultimately, you know, that's what's so important for their well-being and development moving forward. And so if that gets ruptured really early on in the piece, then it can go on to create a whole raft of difficulties for that child. So we want to make sure they have a strong, secure base.
What are some of the signs that you can give to people watching about, you know, in terms of their children's behaviour and how they're being affected, that you could say, well, look, this is one of the triggers that you should get involved in, perhaps looking at whether they're coping or not?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we're looking for signs of anxiety, of distress, in separation cases in particular, that can often play out in terms of anger, sort of outbursts, or it can look like the opposite. You know, children who are very distressed can withdraw and become very internalized and avoidant of their world, because ultimately it's a way for their brain to try and process and cope with this massive change that's happened. And at the core of that, in any separation case, is this sort of idea that the child experiences a loss of one of the parents, because just inherent through that process, they go from living with mum and dad
Yeah.
to only living with one, and, you know, just kind of partially visiting the other. And so there's a grief process attached to that.
Yeah.
Kids are biologically hardwired to be attached to both parents. And this is why alienation, I suppose, has been such an interesting and contentious kind of topic for many years, because in alienation cases, we see the child quite irrationally and abrasively rejecting one of the parents. And what we know in terms of attachment theory is that that just doesn't really happen. Not at an organic kind of primitive level. Kids are always wired to want to be with both parents.
Yeah.
And so if we're not seeing a true grief response through that separation process, and one, you know, a child is just outright shutting out a parent, then we always want to ask questions and just try and understand a bit more about what's going on. And like I was saying earlier, you know, it might be that estrangement is taking place because that parent's behaviour was quite threatening. But actually there's something else going on here, and yeah, it's important.
Yeah, they're tough. I tell you what, it's really tough topics and really tough conversations, and, you know, children going through this, they're the main focus point for every parent, I suppose, that is going through this. They're looking at the welfare of the kids and protecting them, and you know, probably deciphering whether it's their concerns about the other parent's parenting style. I mean, you know, I suppose I can even speak from experience that when you break up with a partner, you probably critique their parenting style a bit more, and they shouldn't be doing it like this, they shouldn't be doing it like that. And I think it's really hard for kids to adapt to that. And
yeah, well, it creates a conflict, doesn't it? And, you know, the child is then put in this impossible dilemma where they don't know who their loyalty is meant to be aligned to.
Yeah.
And, you know, in order to cope with that, what we'll see a lot of the time, particularly in real acrimonious breakdowns, is the children will split the parents. And, you know, they'll perceive one as being kind of all good and the other one as all bad. And a parent is feeding into that. Then it really can be quite damaging for that child in terms of their long-term health implications and well-being. So
you might see them later on as adults, I suppose, coming back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working with a couple at the moment, actually, therapeutically, who, you know, went through this exact kind of situation. And, you know, you fast forward sort of 20 years and there's a lot of hurt there. There's a lot of resentment that the parents put them in that position. And you know, to the extent where parents sometimes will try and coerce their children into making allegations of, you know, sexual abuse, you know, against the other parent or other violent behaviours. And
I've had that before. Sorry.
Yeah, and what's so difficult in the current climate is being able to go through a thorough process to understand which of those allegations are false. Which ones are accurate, because you know, there's a dichotomy that exists there, and you really don't want to get that wrong, because the outcomes can be really grave.
You've got all this power, you know. I suppose it'd be hard to go through life and not use it. Do you just dissect people as you're talking to them? You have to say, look, I can't use this, you know, for evil. I've got to use it for good, and just sit back and let it play out.
Look, you know, it's Adrian, I get asked this question a lot. Sometimes when people find out what I do, you know, they then get nervous and are asking, you know,
I'm nervous. I'm interviewing you. I'm thinking, gee whiz, she's dissecting my brain.
Well, look, you know, if I can just alleviate some of that anxiety and say that, you know, the working week is very intense and get very busy, and I'm more than happy to switch off that part of my brain when I'm in a social setting.
Especially when you pour yourself a glass of wine. That's
great. That's right. So, rest assured.
Oh, lovely. So tell me, we've been quite serious. We've got through some really interesting topics, but is there any sort of funny story that you can say without sort of breaching anyone's privacy or anything like that? But is there anything that stands out in your long-standing career that you'd say, geez, this was like an interesting moment?
Look, you're stretching my brain. I mean, I don't think I have any funny stories per se from either children's court or family court work. Just the nature of the work is so serious.
Yeah, right.
The funniest story that comes to mind for me was during my doctoral training,
Yeah.
which was, quite a long time ago now, but I think this story is etched in my memory forever.
Yeah.
And I was sort of on one of my first kind of paid
Placements?
jobs or
Yeah.
placements, while I was concurrently training.
Yeah.
And it was the first day of the first job, and I was in a maximum security psychiatric hospital interviewing a whole group of acute patients.
Okay.
So,
acute patients, what does that mean for those people out there that don't know?
yeah, so acute essentially is particularly unwell at that point.
Okay. Okay. So they're quite manic. Is that, would you say? Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
They could be manic, they could be experiencing psychosis, or they could just have other sort of serious mental illness.
Yeah.
And have committed a crime as a result of that and been hospitalized rather than sent to prison.
Yeah.
So I was working in this particular hospital, and it's my first day, and I'm a bit of a rookie. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to fake it and get
fake it until you make it. Yeah, good. I like it. Yeah.
And so I've got this whole bunch of questionnaires in front of me that I'm sort of explaining to the patients, and I move into the female section of the hospital, the female ward. And there was one patient in particular who consented and agreed to participate in the research. I explained it all to her and said that all of your responses are kept confidential. That is, the staff on the unit won't get to read these. And, that's the nature of the research. And so reluctantly and very suspiciously, she said, okay. So we went ahead with it and got through it. And as I finished up, I said goodbye to her, and I walked into the nurse's station just to make a file note that I'd seen her. And that was basically the extent of the file note. And of course, she saw me through the window, walking into the nurse's station, pulling out a file, writing it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so she
thought you were breaching. She thought you were just writing her up.
I was writing everything up about her, details, and it caused a massive scene. She became very upset about it.
Yeah, because they're paranoid, I suppose, anyway, because they're there. They're probably fairly paranoid. And
this particular patient was quite suspicious. And that was a challenge to work with. And I guess the mistake for me, or that rookie mistake, was not explaining explicitly, after this, I'm going to go into the nurse's station and just write up that we met. I didn't do that. Of course, after that patient, I did
you learned.
every single time, but in that one moment, she became so distressed that all the duress alarms were called, and there was about 50 staff that had run a different unit in the hospital.
Oh, no. Did you think to yourself, why have I studied psychology? I'm here now. Oh, my gosh. So you learnt then from now, you have to tell everyone, I'm just going to go to that counter, grab a pen, write in the folder, be very specific, and oh my gosh, it's so
important to just be really explicit and never assume, because people don't know sometimes, and I think that's a really important lesson to learn. And I always have made a point from that day forward to be as transparent as possible. But
I love it. You learned the hard way.
Yeah, I learned the hard way. I did feel a bit embarrassed that I caused such a stir on my first day.
How have you found the courts with people that are, have psychiatric issues? I represented a number of criminal clients when I first started. I did criminal law for a bit, and I found that, if you say to a judge or a magistrate, there's an acquired brain injury, or there's an issue with mental health, because they do some strange things. I've had people walk down the street naked, and I've had people walking around with samurai swords and stabbing cars, and very strange things. But have you found that the courts are more likely to try and rehabilitate those people? How many chances do they get before they're given no more?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting kind of question. Certainly in the work that I do as a behaviour support practitioner, a lot of the clients I work with in that space have engaged in behaviours that, if they weren't diagnosed with a particular disability, would have been criminally charged for. But there is more leniency because of an understanding of the nature of their illness. And so often, diversion programs are implemented. Sometimes it might just be with that client group that we get police to come out and talk to them and let them know what the consequences are of such actions. And sometimes that's sufficient. I suppose if it's gotten to the point where you're representing them, then, you know,
they've hit the jackpot. No, I'm joking.
I guess they have hit the jackpot as first and foremost, but
I'll get them off. No, I'm joking.
beyond that, it's certainly escalated, you know, a bit further. And yeah, I think in my experience, I do see that, you know, there is certainly a push to rehabilitate individuals that have a disability because they don't have the same depth and degree of understanding of their behaviour as someone.
Have you found in society, you know, as you've gone through now the last 15 years, that people are getting better or worse, or and if, you know, if you had some tips for people that are struggling in COVID and they're isolated and they're checking their phones every 2 minutes and feeling anxious, and, you know, do you have any tips for people that are struggling at the moment?
Just generally speaking, or, you know?
Oh, just people that I mean, you know, everyone's got jobs. You know, in Australia, we've got a beautiful standard of living, and I love Australia, but I find that you need to work hard. You need, you know, you pay $4.80 for a coffee these days, or if not more.
Yeah.
And I find there's a lot of pressure, and you know, I've had clients that have been successful CEOs and surgeons and lawyers, and they have a breakdown. They have a breakdown. And they hurt themselves or they hurt someone.
Yeah, look, and I think one of the key perpetuating factors in that's really been exacerbated by COVID is the isolation and the nature of kind of this grind that stripping away all of our usual social outlets has kind of put us into. And actually, I was running a wellness seminar for a group of lawyers not so long ago, and it really was a common theme that the delineation between sort of work and home life and that separation that we used to have has since been eroded. And so what is really burning people out is this kind of sense of, you know, feeling like they're kind of working 24/7. And then, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, I'm working with a number of patients at the moment, who have lost their jobs, as you say, and suddenly, you know, have very little to fill their time with. And what I've seen actually the larger effect and impact of that has been is that a lot of the distress that, you know, various individuals carry with them because of whatever reasons, you know, throughout their life, either as adults or unresolved traumas or whatever it might be, that as humans we're able to kind of escape from by throwing ourselves into a social world or a working life, that's been stripped away. And so people are left with, you know, this kind of raw layer and kind of looking at themselves and reaching out for mental health kind of help. And we're really
so
seeing
people are out there going, oh, my mother or my father raised me a certain way, you know, and it sticks with me, you know, a certain, you know, way to act, or I can't sleep during the day, or I can't do this, or I've got to work really hard, I can't take breaks, I can't, you know, slacken off, whatever it is. I mean, I know from a European background, no breaks, you got to work your butt off, you know. I don't know if you're similar, but and then you get older and you think, well, why is that, you know?
Yeah, exactly, you know, and so you find yourself as an adult just engaging in all these sorts of behaviors that you don't really question, you're not very attuned to because you're just so busy all the time. And all of a sudden we've all been kind of forced to, well, either stop or work has, you know, kind of become exponentially busier depending on which end of the spectrum you're on. And then you're faced with, what do I do with all this kind of unprocessed information? And so that's been really tough as well. And ultimately, you know, it sort of results in, you know, layers of response. And so initially what I say to people is try and do and engage in a lot of those sort of self-care behaviors where, you know, if you are really busy with work, for example, that you do make a little bit of time, and that has to become a conscious decision, because otherwise, you know, those mechanisms that you were talking about from, like, you know, your own cultural background, if you do stop, you start to feel guilty that you're wasting your time. And so it's just about starting to recalibrate and, you know, have a different perspective or a different lens. And there's a number of, I guess, strategies that we use to do that. I don't know if we have time to go into that now.
So people basically have to come and see you and sit down, and they must come out feeling like a weight's been lifted off their shoulders. And how do you go home and then de-stress? I mean, do you find your job stressful that you've got to go home and burn some sage around you, or not really?
Yeah, look, burning sage, maybe there's some utility in that, and that I should give it a go at some point.
That's an ancient Greek tradition, isn't it? Or?
Yeah, look, it is, and it was given to me actually by an old colleague several years ago. She gave a bunch of kind of dried sage and said, burn this off, and incense.
Good.
Yeah,
It will wash away. You can just get on with your life and worry about your own problems, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, but it's really just about, making that space. And, if you are feeling really overwhelmed, just trying to not be working 24/7.
Yeah.
Or if you are feeling really isolated,
Yeah.
find ways to engage your mind by doing things that help to mitigate some of that isolation. And I mean, these are really simplistic sort of views. In a therapeutic setting, we really drill down on that. And a lot of that work is around developing insight around why you're feeling that way. What is it that's triggering you? And those triggers that cause you that really kind of complex stress.
It's not the alcohol or the drug use or the violence. It's really what's leading to that, what's triggering that, and
absolutely.
get to the core of it.
The violence and the alcohol, they're all just sort of responsive to symptoms. And so it's about understanding what's caused those symptoms to begin with. And, I always like to work from that lens, because I think strategies are important. Definitely they have a role, and we can talk about what they look like, but it's sort of like putting a Band-Aid on a wound, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I can recommend, I've got a friend here, and she's a bit big at the moment. I've got a little British bulldog.
Oh, hello.
Hello, her name's Tony.
Oh my God.
I got this gorgeous girl. About 6 months ago, and she's helped me tremendously through COVID, because you just sort of pat them and you break up your. Oh, she's getting bigger. I tell you, I think I'm overfeeding her, Ange.
Look, I used to have a British bulldog, and sadly he passed away. But
I'm sorry to hear that. What was his name?
His name was Arnold.
What a good name, Arnie.
Yeah, Arnie.
Oh, they don't last long, do they? But they're just gorgeous,
They are gorgeous. And having pets, I think we've seen statistically that the adoption rates and the purchase rates of animals through COVID has skyrocketed.
Gone up. Yeah, the pet worlds, pet stock and everything are, it's costing me a fortune, but they're just they're thriving in COVID, aren't they? These guys.
Such a beautiful little kind of personality to come home to.
I've had a dog when I was younger, but I haven't had my own dog as an adult. And I've got to say, they got their own little personality. I used to hear dog owners say, oh, they've got different, and I think, no, they don't have different personalities. But now that I've got one, I think, they do. They breathe a certain way, they act a certain way, they give you certain looks at different times, and
they really do. I have he's not that little. He's quite old and big, chinchilla cat. So he's just like a big bull, like a white version of Garfield.
What's his name?
Charlie.
Oh, Charlie, I love it.
Yeah, and he certainly has his own personality.
And he's well fed and looked after.
He's very well fed and looked after.
Yeah, he probably will say to you on the way in, burn the sage. Yeah. Too much negative in it. Burn it off.
Yeah, let's make the space a bit lighter.
Yeah. And pour me a glass of wine. Oh, good on you, Charlie. Yeah.
Yeah. But look, pets has been a wonderful kind of thing during this time, and
Dr. Angela Sorotos, I've got to say it's been an absolute pleasure, and I know you've got to be somewhere, and I just thank you tremendously for your time. It's great to pick your brain a little bit in family law and what you do, and also just in human nature with people going through stressful times. And I can say from experience that you're going to be the next big thing in family law.
Oh, thanks, Adrian. That's very
kind. No problem. And you've got my vote every day of the week. So have a great night. Thank you for spending some time with us.
Well, thanks for having me. And
chin. Thanks, Angela. Have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.